Good evening. It's great to be here.
Hi.
And great to meet Mat Collishaw.
Likewise.
This this show is amazing because it is this mind-boggling combination of very old motifs and even techniques, and then technology that lets you think, how is that even possible? You gave it a name, The Grinder Sees, and this is a title that's already a little bit mystical and old-fashioned. Can you explain? It comes from the Bible. Can you explain what it means to you and why you picked it for this show?
Right. I was brought up in quite a religious family, and we would read the Bible for a couple of hours every night, more on a Sunday, more on a Wednesday, so that and as like a little kid growing up, it's really quite dull to have the Old Testament thrown at you every evening, and then to try to live by the principles of the Bible, sometimes quite challenging. But having this monotonous delivery of these words over and over, you started to look for certain phrases that kind of stood out from the page and meant something to you, that kind of grabbed you in a way, and that weren't just part of this archaic tradition that you really couldn't relate to. And for example, little phrases like, "He who pisseth up against the wall," things like that were vaguely amusing as a kid. And then the grinders cease. Sounds quite pretentious, but it's talking about, so there is an analogy being made about the human body when it starts to close down as frailty and old age set in, and is using the example of a house, or a house or a village, talking about the windows darkening being the eyes when the cataracts start and your eyes stop being able to see clearly, and the grinders cease being your teeth, the actual literal grinders that do all the work when you're trying to digest food. When these cease to function, this is the time when you have to be thinking about the next phase, which is death. And so it's using quite poetic language to talk about your impending demise and mortality. And I wanted something as a title for the show that could link a lot of seemingly quite disparate works in there. There is the Last Meal on Death Row works, and then there is this chandalier with this kind of carousel of like a bacchanalian party. And everything in the book of Ecclesiastes seemed to refer to these things, to the Vanitas theme, which is vanity, vanity, all is vanity, is the end of this chapter, and that eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. So there's like a very somber tone to it, but then there's also this instruction that you should go out and drink and party because your demise is imminent. And the grinder cease was just one little thing that I thought I could choose and would stand on its own, but referred to this whole kind of poetic book about the Vanitas and about death.
Yes. But it also implies for me, when I think of grinding your teeth, when do you grind your teeth? Grinding your teeth is not enjoying a meal. Grinding your teeth is when you have a very difficult problem and you can't sleep at night, or during your sleep you grind your teeth. It's a problem, Talk to your dentist. So for me, it is, when I think back of biblical times, life was not debauchery. Life was really hard, and so the beautiful moments of, let's say, dance, drinking, or having a feast were really limited within the lifespan of a regular person. So grinder sees means death is imminent, but it also means that life is not so great. So it's like pain and the morbidity that's in grinding your teeth, because that's kind of a decay in itself, is already let's say the seed of decay is already in life. And that is, of course, we are here in one room with this beautiful still life, Columbine. When you look at it, the leaves move, and it's a still life, but every still life from 500 years ago already has the seed of decay in it. So every bloom is a symbol of decay, because a bloom or a blossom can only exist for a couple of days maybe, and then it will be already decaying. So this whole idea of a still life carries a lot of memento mori in it.
Yeah.
And then it's the flower, in German Akelei, in English Columbine. When we hear Columbine today, that's a sad word in itself, since the school shooting a couple years ago in Colorado. Did you think of Colorado when you thought of Columbine?
It's also a plant which has poisonous roots to it, so you see the base of the plant there, but the roots are suggested, and there's this idea that this kind of pretty and innocent-looking piece of vegetation also has like this poisonous potential to it. And the Columbine, it did occur to me, and I think it's like very difficult not to like have those references, or to understand those references in a particular way because of current events, things that we read about that happen. And just going back to what you were saying about the grinders, there was also the grinding, the teeth, the anxiety in that, I think seemed quite appropriate. And also there's the kind of sexual allusion with the word grinding, which is quite similar to the woman grinding on the candle as she's dancing in there. But there's another thing that I was trying to get into the exhibition, which I never thought I'd be able to do it, but I was quite conscious of the fact that I was making a lot of work that was either designed or exhibited digitally, that work being one of them. And the fact that this building here used to be a kind of a print factory. It would be where they were making the magazine. Der Spiegel magazine was made here, and it closed, I believe, and this gallery is here because print journalism kind of just reached its end, and it went
Well, don't say that.
digital printing. Okay. But I assume you're doing a lot of your printing digitally.
Art magazines
right?
are different.
Okay.
Daily news. This was
Yeah.
Tagesspiegel, daily news.
Yeah,
I see it's a bit difficult, but art magazines are thriving.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But
With your help.
but it was not the demise period, but more the transition from something that was mechanical going into something that was digital. So they go to a different setup, I imagine, and they no longer needed this kind of space.
Yeah.
So that grinding out of newspapers or magazines on a daily, weekly basis, and the whole evaporation of that, and then it now being a gallery where I'm using images that are presented digitally. I wanted some kind of reference to that, to this, the ghost of the grinding of images out, of media being generated in this very industrial fashion, which is not something that's happening so much.
So when I imagine you as a child with a very religious background, how was it then as a young? Were you still a teenager when you went to Goldsmith College, where all the crazy artists got together in a hotspot and became the soup out of which new things grew for the next couple of decades already? So how was that to come from a religious background to contemporary art in that field?
It was very difficult and challenging, but also extremely exhilarating. And I think most of the people that I know at Goldsmiths College at the time, they were kind of similar. They weren't perhaps all built up in this little Christadelphian community, which was the religion I was raised in. But
What's it called?
They were called the Christadelphian, which is probably a little bit similar to Plymouth Brethren or Jehovah's Witness. I don't know what an equivalent over here would be. Like a little schism of the church, Protestant. And anyway, all these other kind of kids that were at the college at that time, I think they were kind of very bright, intelligent, but they'd never really found an application for that, and they were probably quite miserable failures during school, and they're all misfits. They have found a way of implying that kind of need to do something and try and say something or deal with their relationship to the world. So they're all quite hungry for that. And then when they arrived at this place, suddenly there was this crucible where all of this could happen. It was like this kind of safe house where you had tutors actually encouraging people to think and express themselves and do what they wanted to do. There was no program there. Nobody told you anything. There was no syllabus. You just had to do something, which is quite challenging. And then it would be kind of exhibited in the little kind of tutorial rooms, and it'll be up for discussion. So I think there's a lot of different misfits, all with their own personal baggage that they were trying to find a way of dealing with. And that institution at that time provided like the perfect relief for all of those like weirdo kids.
And where did your love for the old masters stem from, or when did you discover, for example, Albrecht Dürer?
I was in Nottingham, which is like a kind of a medium-sized city in the Midlands in England, and we didn't really have, a contemporary art culture. In London wasn't, so full of contemporary art at the time, so it's quite limited to get access to anything that was happening. No internet, so I used to go to the local library and just pull books off the shelf and just go everything. And they're quite a good reference library there, so I just go from A to Z. I think Albrecht Dürer would have been under D. And just study them and just pore over them and just looking at them. But also because of our religion, we didn't have a TV, so we weren't allowed access to the world through this little magical box, which I was totally fascinated. The allure of this illicit little box with a moving image in the corner of people's rooms, to me, was totally intoxicating. The fact that it was considered to be part of the world and part of the devil's sphere made it all the more alluring, which is perhaps where I'm drawn to animation. It was something that always eluded me. So I used to get my kicks from getting these art books down and just looking at them and trying to bring these pictures to life by just looking at them. So not the real things in galleries and museums, but in reproductions. And there were the worlds that you could escape to in there. And the library only went up to about like 1950 or something. It wasn't a lot after that. So that was everything I knew until I came to London and discovered there was such a thing as the contemporary art world, where people were making exhibitions like now, and in Germany and Italy and America, and then suddenly you were introduced to what was going on at the moment and encouraged to go out and see those exhibitions and try and engage with them.
Amazing. So you worked with photography and all kinds of media. You're a painter. You when were digital media taught at Goldsmith?
It wasn't at all. It didn't really exist back then. I graduated in 1990.
Okay.
And I was really like painting and drawing more than anything. So drawing was my thing, charcoal and Conte crayon and stuff like that. And I was quite good at it, but I realized that it was becoming too fluid with that thing. I kind of become quite good at making an image, and there was nothing that I was doing that was any different to what I'd seen before, what I loved in Caravaggio paintings. So the content I love in those paintings, but I also love the way that they're rendered. But what I was doing wasn't really moving it forward in any way. So I started using photography because it was just a medium that I wasn't very good at it. I knew nothing about it. So the subject matter I picked and the way I photographed it had to be pertinent in some way, because I couldn't rely on having all the skills that I learned with drawing and painting. So I had to reframe my way of looking at the world through a lens. So that led me away from like the drawing and painting, and I just became very interested in the manipulation of image and the way that images can make you think and feel certain things, and the way that things like religion and political propaganda and advertising and painting, and all of these things are designed in a certain way to make you believe in certain things. And when computers arrived with a tool like Photoshop software on their which I think was about 94, 95 when I started using it. It's just like, this is like a really incredible tool with this amazing potential. And all those books I'd read about photography and the way that images can be fabricated and the way that Trotsky could be removed from a picture of like Russian politicians. Those kind of manipulation, which was happening anyway, but it was a very kind of tortured procedure, but it was still kind of trying to emulate painting in a certain way, as trying to create a fiction which portrays itself as being a true image. Suddenly Photoshop was a new tool for the manipulation of the image, and so I started using it quite religiously.
Now, the first work, when you walk into these specially created galleries, is this very big tree, which, by the way, I find a very nice entrance here with a little patch of grass, and then you have this giant 1,000-year-old oak. How did you create this artwork? It seems like you see the tree slowly moving. So how many images were necessary to create this installation?
So it's using a very old technique, like a very lo-fi technology, which is the Pepper's Ghost optical illusion. Which
can you say that again? It's
a very basic technology for the actual projected image.
Yeah.
But the original capture of the image of the tree was done with like laser scanning. So it's the kind of tool that you would use, or architects and surveyors use. So you have a building or a road or somewhere that you need to do planning, and you set up a laser scanner in certain points, and then that scanner basically sends out like little laser beams which hit a surface, and then the time between it hitting the surface and being reflected back to the scanner is measured, and that is moving around the whole of your object, and you're collecting millions, hundreds of millions of data points, and then you have basically lots of data that you can run through certain software to create what appears to be an image, but is essentially just like millions of little points, all making up a three-dimensional image.
And you call that an old-fashioned technique?
No, but so once I've got all that data, in this instance, I create a virtual camera on a computer which travels around my tree, pointing at the tree, and I then have a video, which in this case is like a 33-minute long video, which appears to be like a tree that's slowly rotating. There's a laser scan, and it really interrogates its subject in a way that no other medium does. Like a photograph makes a record of the object that it's looking at, but the scanner is like so emotionally detached and impartial. It's all about just getting these little data points, which it will then put together to create this image.
I don't want to interrupt, but
so it's that kind of interrogation of this thing, like trying to find some kind of meaning in it. Where is it? Where is this thing? What is it? Where is it? That was the actual capture technology I used for getting the tree itself, and then it's presented in the style of the Pepper's Ghost optical illusion.
That's the word I don't. What illusion?
Pepper's Ghost.
Pepper's Ghost. Okay.
Name.
Okay.
Pepper was the guy who invented it. So it's the illusion that was originally used in theatres in the 19th century. So in Victorian theatres, they would have a performance of Hamlet, and to create the ghost effect, they would have a diagonal sheet of glass. And then below stage would be like a guy with a white sheet on him with a bright light pointing at him. The audience can't see him because he's below stage, but they can see his reflection in the diagonal sheet of glass. So you have actors on the stage which appear to be interacting with this translucent ghost-like image. And it's still a popular way of creating optical illusions or hologram-like images now. They use it with they'll do a concert where Tupac, who's no longer alive can appear on stage. Michael Jackson used it once. So it's like a kind of still like a medium that's current, but it's very, very simple, very primitive.
If you say it's simple, it was really still confusing to me when you see it, because the projector projects it onto a mirror. The mirror projects it to the floor, and then the diagonal pane of glass is above it, but I still don't know how the image from the floor gets up on the wall.
Yeah.
And when you walk behind the glass, you think it's on the wall, but then you walk behind the diagonal glass and it's not on the wall. So I still don't get from the floor to the pane of glass how that works.
Yeah, so it's just a reflection. Excuse me, this is your phone then, so...
It may be not very reflective.
Yeah. I don't know if you're getting it from there, but
Okay.
basically that's what you've got. You've got an image here,
Okay,
and then
okay.
you have a reflection of it in there. So it's a clear film.
Okay.
So instead of using glass, I've used it's like a clear plastic
Okay.
film, which is suspended on a frame diagonally. So you're looking at a reflection of what's on the floor in that. It's a ridiculously complicated way of projecting an image. And I came up with the idea, and then I kind of researched other easier ways of doing it, and you can now buy certain fabric, which is like a mesh, which you can project onto, which is also transparent, so you can get an image, but you can also see through it. So it gives a similar effect. It's not quite as clear as that is. But I realized that what I was trying to do was to create something that needed a lot of paraphernalia to make that image appear, because what I was trying to do was to say something about like the business of creating an image, or the business of creating an illusion of an image.
The whole the creating business that you are in works very well in that work, I think, because you see it and you don't know, is it a microscopic image of a cancer cell or a blood vessel or something, or is it something from the universe and some kind of solar system? So it really has this this idea. It could be tiny, it could be huge, and it's an image that's very fascinating. But we haven't talked about the tree itself.
Yeah.
What kind of tree is it?
It's a very specific tree. So one of the few things we had to do in Nottingham when we were growing up, when we didn't have any internet or TV, was to go to Sherwood Forest and look at the major oak, which is allegedly the tree where Robin Hood and his merry men used to hide out when they were being pursued by the sheriff. So it's a very old oak tree. It's hollow, so you can get inside of it. But because it's so old, it just wants to die. But because of its significance to the tourist industry and because of its mythological status, they won't allow it to die. So it's kept alive by these metal rods which are supporting its ancient branches, which creep out quite a horizontal tree. And then there are chains that are supporting these branches from the center of the tree. So it looks a bit like some kind of a strange S&M situation. There's this very ancient tree that just wants to die with some dignity, but it's being kept alive by this support system that they've introduced. And at the time that I was making it was for another exhibition. I had my own reasons for introducing this archaic-looking hollow tree, but it was the time of the referendum on the European Union in England, and there was a lot of talk about wanting to kind of Britain to return to its sovereignty, and people's talking about this idea of ye old England, this England of tradition and the past, and the oak tree is, particularly an elderly oak, is a symbol of England. And people seem to be talking about this idea of England when there was full employment and there were no immigrants and everything was rosy. And there seemed to be this illusion of this kind of perfect period, this golden period in England's past, Albion, this mythical country that perhaps didn't ever really exist. It's just a creation of myth, and it's something that people want to believe in, and something that people kind of want to hop back to. And so I wanted to make the work in this ridiculously complex fashion, because it's about trying to create this illusion of this thing that just wants to die, but we want to preserve it and we want to keep it alive. But to create it using all this paraphernalia, because it's a construct, it's a myth that's been created by us, by these ideas, by writing and pictures and all the myths that we've been peddling about England for years.
And it's interesting that this installation will move to Madrid afterwards and will be shown at the Botanical Garden in Madrid on March 31st.
Yeah.
So that's the day of Brexit.
Right.
That will be interesting. But it's funny that you say you thought of SM. What's it called? SNM? No.
Yeah, the sadomasochistic.
Sadomasochism.
thing.
When I saw the crutches, I was thinking of an old age home or some. I mean, I just had a very different association with those sticks.
Yeah, it's a very sad tree. There's a lot of it's heaving with pathos.
Yeah, but a botanical question: is it you can't just keep alive a tree with crutches? Does it get vitamins or something?
It would probably exist in another form, but I assume what happens with trees is that like kind of certain limbs that are like periphery would just fall off.
Yeah, but I think it wants to live. It wants to live.
Okay, but it'd probably just be kind of like that.
Yeah.
Without all these extraneous like kind of branches to it. But they need the image of it. They're not really interested in the life of the tree. They need the image of the tree to survive.
Another thing that is alive but is also a little bit sad, the beautiful paintings of the birds that are in the same room. It's a topic that I see in some of your work, captivity, that something is a captive, or let's say even the works that are done, the photographs of the last meals of inmates on death row, that is also about captives. But these new works of birds, can you talk a little bit about them? There's graffiti and there's beautiful birds that remind me of course, the goldfinch. With this painting, everybody read the book, but the painting is actually in the Mauritshuis goldfinch. Oh, by the way, you spoke of Michael Jackson. There's a portrait of Karel Fabricius in the Städel Museum, and he looks exactly like Michael Jackson. Do you know that?
No.
It's from the 17th century, and it's unbelievable. You have to look it up.
What period?
It's
Michael
Karel
Jackson period, though.
Oh, he has a hat and like a cape, and I think a red cape and a black hat.
Okay.
It's unbelievable. But anyway, this is going far from the subject. The birds remind me of the beautiful goldfinch by Karel Fabricius. So it's a topic. It's a beautiful topic. A bird has beautiful feathers. It's a beautiful thing. And it was, I think, when it was painted in the 17th century, it was not so much about captivity. I think people did not try to understand the feelings of animals so much at the time because they had other problems.
Like a Trompe l'oeil type painting, and it's just like a demonstration of your skill as a painter.
Yeah.
And the fact it's like a little bit of a joke. It's like the bird can't fly away because it's chained to the wall, but it can't fly away because it's a painting. It's not really there, so it's like a little bit. I assumed that's kind of what it was about. Anyway, with what I was trying to do with them is part of a larger exhibition that had another bird sculpture inside of it, and the exhibition was called The Centrifugal Soul, and it was about the way that we project an image of ourselves and that we adorn ourselves with accessories such as Rolex watches and SUVs and Gucci clothes, and it's a way of projecting an image of ourselves to the opposite sex or to the same sex, but a way of manufacturing an image to make ourselves look more attractive. And that with social media now that this is becoming accelerated and people are curating their appearance in a way that they would have been impossible 20 years ago, and everybody's choreographing their personality using filters on their pictures of their face, and that so much effort is being put onto our exterior, onto our appearance, that there is this kind of emptiness at our core, where qualities like dignity and reticence and all those things used to be. And the evolutionary psychologist / biologist who I was developing the project with has written several books about it, and his initial reference point or his demonstration of this particular attribute of human nature is with birds, particularly exotic birds, but it also happens with a lot of other garden birds. You find in England that the males will all have brightly covered liveries and like these dynamic designs to attract a mate. That's why the birds are designed in that way, and they're not just for us to look pretty when they're in the garden. That it's essentially like a fundamental tool for mating and propagating their genes, and if they don't succeed, then their gene line will die out. And so, far from it being this kind of pretty or beautiful little thing, there's like a desperation in that. It's like a survival need. It's a tool that they have to have in order to survive. So for me, these birds that used to live in rural environments, they've now come into the cities. They're drawn to urban environments because they need food and shelter and all those things that the city bring, but they're now competing with a lot more visual pollution. So there's graffiti and advertising everywhere, so suddenly all those brightly coloured liveries which would stand out in like a kind of a more green rural environment, they're in competition with all the shapes and colours and movements that are going on in the city. And I thought there was something a little sad and poignant in that. And I chained them to the wall in a little bit of a reference to the Fabrici's painting, and also this thing of them being like kind of genetically programmed to perpetuate their species, and that design and that self-promotion is something that they're just compelled to do, and the sadness in that. And it was summed up a little bit, I think, by a quote from the English novelist Kingsley Amis, who lost his libido in his later years, and when he did, he said, "Thank God for that, because it's like being chained to an idiot for 50 years." So it's like this sexual impulse, although it's kind of a lot of fun, got him into a lot of trouble, and it's not something that he chose to have. It was just like an obligation, something that he was chained to.
Interesting. Yeah, the thoughts that come when looking at those little paintings, I also thought the birds have these feathers as their decoration or armor or warmth, or let's say signifier of sexual prowess, but they take time to grow, whereas graffiti is done so quickly, and the competition between something that can be so bright so quickly in a matter of split seconds, whereas the bird has only this one coat. So I think maybe some birds change coats in the winter or something, but I was thinking of that. By the way, birds look beautiful and we perceive them as these cute shapes, but when they don't have the feathers, they also have a totally different shape and often look horrible. Recently I saw a swan without feathers, and it looks like a monstrous dinosaur. They are very much related to dinosaurs too. My husband doesn't like birds because he sees dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And when I think
Creepy.
they try to sing, he sees how they are doing some horrible dinosaur sound.
Yeah, they become like very machine-like, very mechanistic, and I'm making another project at the moment that has animatronic birds in, coincidentally, without feathers.
Yeah.
And as soon as you take all that away, they suddenly become these little machines, which is kind of what I was thinking about there, that behind all the kind of cute, pretty feathering, there's a genetic impulse.
Yeah. Just a footnote, are you a bird watcher? I know it's very popular in Great Britain.
Yeah, no, I was when I was a kid. Though. I used to draw and paint and do bird watching a lot, and read a lot of books and studied a lot of pictures of birds when I was younger.
So how do you? The idea is you have a background of graffiti or of let's say some surface, some industrial surface or some neglected surface that has color scheme similar to the birds. Do you?
Yeah.
How do you? You obviously didn't tie a bird to the wall that looked like that. How did you make the image?
Probably would have been easier if I had them. I thought about it. I'm not a fan of graffiti at all, really, and it's kind of a little bit of a joke because street art, graffiti art is kind of there on the periphery of the art world, and it's just a way of, I think, generally quite wealthy people trying to buy into something that's a little bit urban. I don't know if anybody's into it, I apologize. But that seems to me a little disingenuous, the way the way street art is peddled as being kind of quite gritty. But I did read that the first kind of guy who became known for making graffiti, I think it was in Detroit or somewhere, he did it as like a kind of, appealing to his potential suitor, a girl who used to come into town on a train every morning. So he'd graffiti outside the train station there so she would see it, these little love messages that he'd give to her. So that was just him using like some visual flourish to try and create something that's alluring for her. But with mine, I'm looking for the dynamic shapes and the colors and the textures that I think is going to fit with that bird. So I'm just going through thousands of images on websites like Shutterstock, which is like an image bank. They've just got trillions of images on there. So I just do a graffiti search and then I go through, and so for one of those, I'd probably go through like between 500 and 1,000 images looking for a match, and I'll choose probably about 30 of them that I think are potentially good, and then put the image behind them on Photoshop. So I've got a bird, and then my graffiti behind them, and then I whittle that down to about 3 or 5, and then I start changing the scale of the wall behind them, and then flipping them and kind of messing around with them. And then I get down to one background that I think might work, and then I'll take a little bit of this patch and put it over there. It's kind of the same process of going about making a figurative painting, really, that uses just shapes and colors and trying to get a dynamic that works to a degree that you don't think about it. You just look at it and everything's doing its job, so that there's nothing in there doing something that's not working towards the whole of the image.
And the painting?
And then the painting is not done by me, it's done by this Chinese girl who's very good at copying exactly what I've got. So that I do the composition, and then I put it into a 3D program where I introduce like the chain and the bar and the shadow, so that everything is exactly as it would look, as it should look.
And the Chinese girl is in China, or is it in London?
She's in London, yeah. But the Chinese are very, very disciplined. I found it difficult to find any European painter who could do it quite as accurately, because generally people have certain subjective ideas about how things should look, but with the Chinese painters, they're just totally accurate. It's like a Faschischmill. It's just exactly as it should be.
Amazing. So
and why do that? Because I think to me to then take it back to oil painting after all these other things that I've done, to reference this like 17th century painting and put it back in that context.
Yeah. And then the next room afterwards has also, it's very dark, so it looks like a painting, but it's a photograph, still life, of these meals that are beautifully arranged and very have a lot of feeling to them, but also knowing that these are the last meals that some prisoners ordered. So do you have a list of these meals, and then you rearrange them, because obviously there's not an artist present to photograph it so beautifully.
Yeah.
So it's a list saying shrimps, mussels, and lettuce, and you recreate it. Get the groceries and
there's a lot of information online, and then I bought quite a few books on the subject, but I tried to cross-reference them to make sure that the information was accurate as possible. So I noticed that some people would have, like Gary Gilmore as having 3 boiled eggs, and some people would say he only had 2. And I didn't want to be caught out by a pedant afterwards who would come in and saying, actually, it wasn't cornflakes, it was Cheerios. So once I got a list which I thought was pretty accurate, and I had hundreds of them, and I had them in the folder, and then every night when I go to bed, I just go through them all and try to find ones that I thought, not that would look good, but that would work as a series. So I needed a range from people who ask for complete banquets, and then people who went for just like the communion glass and wafer. So somebody just had like an apple, somebody just a little bowl of yogurt, and tried to find a range. And then also there's a lot of different ethnicities. There's a lot of African American food being chosen, a lot of Mexican food being chosen for obvious reasons. And also there's a lot of kind of comfort eating. So people are choosing things like breakfast cereal and ice cream, things that possibly remind them of kind of times when they felt more comfortable, which is quite touching. And then when I got my range of foods, then I just started making a setup with them. And they're not as probably accurate as they could have been. I initially saw some photographs of Last Meal on Death Rows in the Sunday Times magazine like 20 years ago, maybe more. And they were photographed from up above on like a kind of a blue plastic tray. And they're taken with like a very strong flash, and they're in bright lyric colors. And so the pictures themselves were very different to the ones that I did. And they're kind of like a journalistic pictures, recreations. And they're very poignant, and they stayed with me, and I thought I'd love to do something with them somewhere, because it's just really quite powerful the way that you can just have an image of like a cheeseburger and a Coke, but somehow they're extremely profound. And because I'm quite slow in my working method, it took me a long time to get that point of thinking, okay, well, if I restage them and photograph them in the style of 17th century still life Dutch or Spanish still life paintings, then you're thinking about those things that you look at when you look at a Vanitas painting, which is this meaningless accumulation of worldly goods and the transience of life, and you're looking at some chicken wings or nuggets and stuff. And to make these pictures as like surrogate portraits of the prisoners who were executed, and chose them as representing them as their final choice before they're executed.
Those pictures are really very moving, and really, like you say, they are almost like portraits. And this key, sometimes a bit of knowledge is like the key to understanding many things, but of course that's especially true for artworks, and especially for still lifes. I think when I studied art history, and we were looking at, let's say, a very crowded still life with animals and some fruit and so not animals, flowers, fruit, etc., then there was so much symbolism in it. A little caterpillar or a worm in an apple is the symbol of the devil, because it's the apple is something good and perfect, and the little worm who's eating it is destroying food or life. The caterpillar is also eating away on some leaf, but it's also a symbol that it will turn into a butterfly, and that's a Christian symbol again, because Christ was crucified, was like a, how do you call the thing between caterpillar and butterfly?
The chrysalis. Yeah.
The what?
Chrysalis.
Chrysalis?
Yeah.
Okay, that is like a dead thing, but then wonderful life comes out of it again. Christ is born again and goes to heaven. So the caterpillar is in a way also a Christian symbol. So there are so many things that can be deciphered. And the still lifes that you made of these meals, of course, the knowledge of what kind of meal this is very important. But once you know it's the last meal of somebody, can somebody even enjoy a meal when he knows he's going to be put to death in an hour or so? It's just unimaginable.
Yeah, and it's the appearance of that civility that we are being like kind of presenting this meal towards them. And there's that veneer of being civilized.
Yeah.
And there is something barbaric just beneath the surface there. And the clinical nature of serving that last meal is something that's really quite...
awful. But I was... sorry.
Were you saying about the paintings, that's when you're saying why do I like reference art history? It's just that it's so rich in what can happen in one image, and like the restrictions that painting gives, that way of making image making
Yeah.
meant that people pack a lot more in there.
Yeah.
And now, because we have so many different ways of making visual stimulus,
Yeah.
the emphasis is not so much on getting everything into one small thing, which is why like old master paintings are so like interesting and important for me.
And I think one big difference between paintings from hundreds of years ago, where there was no movie theater, there were so few paintings that one painting must have been like a major Hollywood production today. And today, with this flood, of course, of images, I'm wondering, people in former times understood some symbols, but today we understand so many symbols as well. When I just think of the emojis and the range of emotion that goes into one emoji, you know, we get sometimes a message can be just one emoji, and it's a wink, wink, or a tear or something, and you see the whole phrase in it. I'm so sorry, or something can be just one image, a tiny dot. But what I like about this work also that it's so slow, and that it has this it gives this impetus to look at something relaxed and focused and without a hurry, because so many images today are made for people who are in a hurry and who don't have much time. But this is really calling out, take your time and look at me slowly.
Yeah, I made another animated Albrecht Dürer work before this one, and I made it because I was in hospital and I thought that I was dying, a little melodramatically, but I had lost half of my blood. And,
in an accident?
No, I had several stomach ulcers all burst at the same time, so I was just losing a lot of blood. And then when I was in hospital, I just started thinking about this image, which was the great tuft, which is just the grass growing on a bit of dirt, with a bit of water there, and thinking how this image of nothingness really is totally insignificant. The fact that Albrecht Dürer had chosen to paint it instead of painting like royalty or a politician or somebody with wealth, power or privilege, member of the church, picked this piece of grass and painted it in very kind of intricate detail, and to give it that amount of time and respect seems to be quite an amazing thing to do. It's the thing that you walk by on your way between here and there at the side of the road. And that this little bit of nothingness, this thing which is life, because they're just weeds and they grow without being nurtured. They will grow on their own accord. It's there, it's life as it is. And that little thing, although it was nothing, it was everything, because it was life. And I thought if I ever get out of this hospital, I'd like to make something with this very simple picture and to breathe life into it, to animate it, to just put that element of breath, because that is that very, very simple, basic thing, which is nothing, but it's kind of like everything as well. So this work was a kind of a work that came after that, but with a similar kind of thinking.
Well, maybe as a last work for us to discuss, it's the opposite of simple and low. It's this amazing chandelier in the last room that also looks technically very, very difficult to make and to think up, just to have the ideas. I think most of you have seen it already. It's the illusion of a spinning chandelier where kind of not really an orgy, but debauchery is happening. How did you come up with that idea, and then how difficult is it to install it if, let's say, a collector wants it at home?
Okay, right. I was invited to make a work for a 17th century banqueting hall, and I wanted to make something about that whole state of being that you get into eating and drinking and indulgence and that kind of whole whirlwind where you're taken out of the real world as you know it and you're in this other arena, which is not dissimilar from getting involved in the arts, of just like removing yourself into this whole different world. But in this sense, it's the like inebriation and movement and indulgence. And so I wanted to make something that literally depicted it, but also gave the feeling of being drawn into this kind of whole kind of cornucopia of excess. And I chose to use this technique, which I've used on a few other sculptures that I made, and it's called a three-dimensional zoetrope. So it's based on the same principle as the Victorian cylinder with the slots in it, which you spin round. You look through the slot, and there's the illusion of an animated image. And in this case, it's three-dimensional images which are all slightly different. And instead of having the slots, I have a stroboscope, so light flashes very quickly. So you're looking at basically little sequences of an animated image, which gives you the illusion of movement. But the whole structure, which is the chandelier, the structure you put it on has to be something that kind of mirrors itself all the way around. Otherwise, you've got quite serious problems with the way the whole thing looks. And trying to think about something that would lend itself to a banqueting scene, a chandelier fitted perfectly because it's something that's basically the same thing repeating itself all the way around. So once I got that as my frame on which I could hang things, I started designing this whole little scene with these little characters inside it. So this whole thing is like a delusional state that you get yourself into, and the thing itself is an optical illusion. It's not really happening. What you're seeing is not really there. It's something that's kind of created by certain arrangements of mechanics and lighting. And I also wanted it to look kind of a little bit desperate and sad and frantic, so that the enjoyment, although you get it for the first few seconds, then the repetitive nature of all that becomes a little distressing.
Yeah, it has that. First of all, the little bodies that you depicted are a bit, let's say, over their prime, and it's this feeling that when too much alcohol has flown and the night has gone on for a while, and you think already, oh my God, I will feel horrible tomorrow. That it already has the seed of it in there. Again, like the decay is palpable.
It's probably about 12:30 p.m. I think, something like that.
Maybe later.
Towards the end of the night. Yeah.
Yeah, and with the repetition, the grinding in a way, it's this. Here we go again. This lust in those old guys that. Oh yeah, it really has a kind of a sad feeling to it.
And it's something that you see in a lot. I mean, I use as my references like lots of like Rubens paintings and various other images, and it's been there, and it's there, and the Greeks were painting it. Salina's drinking from the wine, and so it's there through art history, and it's there through the history of humanity. I think that need to just suddenly, get trashed, get wrecked, and that kind of the fact that it's something that's so cyclical and repetitive, and like something that we're kind of chained to. I mean, I'm not saying everybody in this room is that dissolute, but it seems to be like a kind of a pattern that keeps recurring, and it's just part of the human condition.
But it's amazing, the effect of it, especially the guys, the monkey and the little guy on the bottom of the chandelier. It really strikes me as fascinating how it's so convincing, feeling like there's a little guy really moving around. It's amazing.
The monkey's got a piece of ham. I don't know if you can see that. It wasn't as clear as I'd intended.
Okay.
So the guy's trying to get the ham back off the monkey.
And then one other guy is eating ham and throwing up, and there's.
Yeah, we.
What's coming out of his mouth? It's probably.
There's a lot of things
ham.
inside that work which are purely structural. So, like the beads, for example, rather than being like a little bit of lace with some like kind of lovely beads on them, they're actually kind of very strong steel bar with these kind of strong glass beads on, which are all kind of positioned together to give the whole thing support, because it's moving so fast that the whole thing has to be really quite rock solid. And unfortunately we had a little bar, supporting bar, which went between one of the guys standing on the candle, through the candle, and then into the guy on the other side of the candle. And when I initially showed it, it was with a National Trust property, and they came around and looked, and then they looked extremely worried, and then they went away and they had a meeting with 13 different people. They came back and said, sorry, we've had this meeting now, it's been for over an hour, and that rod that you have there has got to go, because it appeared as though the guy from behind had this like cylinder which was about this thick, scaled up, going into the rear end of this other guy in front of him. And I hadn't even noticed that it was there. I wasn't looking for that kind of licentious content. And they made us remove it, which meant like kind of sawing very delicately 36 little points all the way around. It took several hours to remove it, but
you made it work.
They're just looking for things that are not there.
Great. Well, wine and debauchery may be a good last topic. There's still some wine left, I think, here, and the exhibition is still on. So thank you very much for sharing your insights, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you.